starting recording. Okay, so for our presentation here, okay, wait, just adjust the screen here. Okay, so we'll be using Menti for our session, although we'll be jumping between PowerPoints and then Menti. The Menti would just be for, I guess, yeah, participation, right? But in terms of the presentation, PowerPoint tayo. Because Menti is not really made for presentation, I would say. Although we can use Menti as a sort of PowerPoint, but I'm not sure if there are limits, like on how many slides. Like for example, Google Jamboard, there's only 20 slides available. So I cannot really make a very long presentation in Google Jamboard. But for Menti, I have not yet tested the extremities of Menti. And the other good thing about Menti is that it adjusts on the user interface. Like for example, if you're using your phone, it will adjust accordingly. Unlike, let's say, Google Jamboard, Google Slides, they do not adjust to the screen of the user. So that's the downside of using those. But for Menti, I would prefer using this if I'm dealing with let's say, in an online class. And if the contents of these slides are minimal. So meaning, when we are using Menti, majority of the output, or rather input rather, should be from the speaker. And then we'll be having inputs from the participants. Okay, so as a difference between using Google Slides and then using Menti. Okay. For our VLP, right, we'll be covering grade 3 first, and then we'll be jumping to grade 4, and then 5, and then 6. So as for the content itself, I think that's the difficult part on how I can dissect it properly, because I don't really have a book for grade 3, 4, and 5, and 6. So I was thinking of having the discussion on, let's say, physics, like a sort of an advanced review for your LET exam, right? Because for your LET exam, for BEd students, you have your Prof Ed, and then you have your general education. And when it comes to general education, the difficulty is actually in terms of not just elementary level, but also in terms of high school level. So we'll be using, or rather, we'll be covering physics and earth and space science in a somewhat higher level. Although when I say higher, high school level, not elementary level. Okay, so how do we exactly teach science in elementary? Although of course we can also extend that to high school. Okay, so we have 5 methods. We have the 5 E's method. We have engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So this would be the method that you would be using most of the time, or rather all of the time actually, if you're going to teach science. Right, so what is engage? Hopefully you're on this slide, right? So what is engage? So this is the introductory part where the task is presented using connections in the previous experiences, lessons, or prior learning. So trigger and motivating questions may be asked, or situations can be presented here. So as the name implies, this is where we elicit elicit some participation for your or from your students. However, since we are dealing with elementary students, your motivational activity should of course be simplified, right? And I think in your methods class you been at least made aware of how should you present your lessons, present your activities, and present your assessment. Like for example, in terms of giving instructions, your language should be simplified or made with easier terms. Like for example, instead of using direction, we could say, what should you do? As explicit as possible. What should you do in this step? Instead of saying, let's say, in a high school setting, direction, encircle the letter of the answer. Although for elementary, we can say, okay, what should you do? Okay, encircle the letter of the correct answer to the number provided. But you can be more elaborate in terms of the responses or the direction. However, some students are already aware, okay, this is already the instruction, or this is already the what the students should do on this step. And usually for sciences, we don't really follow mother tongue base, right? Although we do follow it, but in terms of the direct terms, it's more of a borrowed word, right? For example, for force, we use it as is. We don't use force as, let's say, fuerza, right? Because there would be a different connotation. What about speed? We just say speed as, speed and not bilis in Tagalog, or kaskas in Bicol, right? So that's one of the difficulties in discussing, let's say, science, right? Because in other countries, they do have specific translations. Let's say in Europe, right? Because they have a lot of languages there, they have several translations for scientific terms. What else? As far as I know, in Japan also, they have specific terms. So in Japan, of course, they don't teach science and mathematics in English. Right? They have an entirely separate subject for English. So when they're discussing mathematics and science, they are really teaching it in their mother tongue, in Japanese. But here in the Philippines, since we're a bilingual country, we teach it in English or Tagalog. But as for the specific terms, okay, we'll have to use the English or the borrowed language. Okay, so for engage, right, this is in the introductory part. When it comes to what sort of activity should you choose, since we're dealing with elementary, usually it's something more highly bodily active, right? Somewhere where they could use their hands, or they would have to move, right? And not a simple questions. Although at higher levels we can do that, but for elementary, say 3, 4, and 5 and 6, especially for grade 3, you can ask them to pick up some object that is related to your topic, or even categorizing, or even showing off a demo, and then let the students perform the demo. Like for example, the paper towel would it stay dry or not if you dip it in water, if it's inside a glass. What about for the next step? We have explore. Now for explore, so this portion is composed of varied hands-on or minds-on activities intended for students to work on collaboratively in groups or individually. So they would have inquiry-based approaches that are utilized in exploration, where questioning, sharing, communicating are encouraged between and among the learners with the guidance of the teacher. So exploratory activities will depend on the subject content to be tackled. So for physics and earth and space, it's actually easier to make examples out of this compared to, I would say, chemistry and biology. Although for chemistry, you could have some sort of realia, or you can bring an actual model. For biology, it's actually easier, right? You have your animals, your plants. For physics, it's more on the movement, right? Or on the objects. Since physics talks about the laws of nature, right? It's very easy to make examples or let the students demonstrate how this law is present on a certain scenario. So of course, you'll have to give explicit instructions on how they should do it. Or what about you want the students to go out of the class, right? So this is a very good example for students where they could, well, of course, literally go out of the class. And in the most literal sense, the learning is not confined inside the classroom. However, we should give them some instructions that, okay, they should not stay away from the group or just stay within the specific area. Because elementary students, well, they can tend to be noisy, right? So you have to sometimes contain their energy so that they won't disturb the other classes. Okay, and going back again to our previous slide, right? 3 weeks ago. So inquiry-based approaches means that we want the students to ask questions. We want to spark their curiosity, and that is how we essentially start their learning. Right? If the student is not motivated to learn, it would be hard for them to participate actively and especially collaborating with other students. Okay, so after exploring, we'll have the explain portion. Now for the explain portion, this is usually on the part of the teacher. However, when it comes to my students, I would like my students to not just perform a sort of lecture, but to ask questions. Alright, so in the explain part, you want to ask questions a lot, right? Because questions is how you're going to mold your students. Especially for elementary students, they have a lot of questions, right? And some of these questions, I would say, are they're out of the box, right? And sometimes the answers would cannot be explained in a simple manner. So this is where the master of the lesson would arrive, right? So for myself, right, since I teach college now, explaining my specific fields in high school would be a bit more difficult for me, even though I graduated as a BSED student, right? But in terms of relevant skills, well, I'm already a college instructor, so different skill set for high school, right? Because for college, that's andragogy. For elementary, high school, that's pedagogy. We do things differently in college, right? Of course, because of the principles behind andragogy. Okay, so in the explaining part, right, so it's more expository in nature, providing the needed knowledge of the subject matter. So the explain step will clarify the results of explorations. It will confirm and validate what was previously achieved in the exploration. So in the explain part, this is also where we can fix the misconceptions. So when I say misconceptions, these are in the rawest term, errors in their learnings, right? And when it comes to science, this misconception could lead to let's say a domino effect, when it comes to grade 4, 5, and 6, right? Due to the nature of the spiral curriculum. Like, for example, um, although this was K2, K10, right? That's essentially grade 10. In one of the books that I've read, or that was given to me as a reference to teach, when it comes to biology, there were some errors in the reproductive, what's the proper term? On how starfish reproduce, right? Okay, yeah, that's the proper term. On how starfish reproduce. They said there in the book that starfish reproduce by some sort of fission, right? This, if you cut this starfish, one of the starfish hands, it could grow into another starfish. Well, that's not technically wrong, but it only happens in certain species of starfish, right? So as they grow up, your students would grow up, they might think, okay, all starfish would be like this, but in reality, there's only specific starfish that are like this. So starfish, for most of them, since they are essentially like what, they're polyps, they still release sperm cell and egg cell in the ocean. Although technically it's more of a sperm cell floating in the ocean, right? So that's how they reproduce. But for physics, usually there's not a lot of misconception, since they're easily replicated, they're easily understood. However, the misconception would come in the proper usage of terms. For example, heat and temperature. So this is already high school stuff, but in elementary, you might also encounter some misconception when it comes to using these terms. Okay, so that's explaining part, right? Usually, that's a more of expository, but I would advise you to ask more questions. How would your students arrive to these answers? So you use scaffolding. So when you say scaffolding, in your methods, right, we ask several questions for the students to arrive to the correct answer. Okay, and then we have elaborate. So for elaborate, this is more of a validation of what they have learned in the explain part. So looking back at our previous steps, oh wait, did it move? Okay, so explore. So if explore is more of a preliminary activity, then elaborate would be more technical. Alright, so that means in here, for the students, the activities that they would be doing here are much more scientific in nature, right? And usually in science, one of the first few topics that you would teach the student is the scientific method. Right, so for the scientific method, you have your observe, gathering data, you have your hypothesis, performing the experiment, validating the hypothesis, and then coming up with a conclusion. So similarly, here in elaborate, they would have to perform, not exactly experiment, although yeah, of course, you can have an experiment, but it is more, yeah, let's say technical in its approach, unlike in the explore part, where there is much more room for error, right? Because the error in the explore part would be fixed in the explain step or explain part, but in elaborate step or part, sorry, let's just call it a step. In the elaborate step, these misconceptions should have been gone by then, right? So you would expect most of your students to explain their answer more appropriately. Okay, so that's the difference between explore and then elaborate. Okay. So if elaborate is more on hands-on activities again, but on a deeper level, then the next step would be, okay, evaluate. So for evaluating, as the name implies, this is a formative assessment to determine the progress of the student's learning of the lesson. So this is like the last step already in determining, are there still misconceptions, right? Because in assessment, a formative assessment would tell you what are the errors in the student's learning. So of course, there are also other forms of assessment included in the evaluation. 2 minutes break. I'm going to get water. Okay, so back here again. So in evaluate, this is more of a pen and paper type of evaluation, right? So if elaborate is another form of activity, explore is again another set of activities, but on a deeper level, then evaluate would be more, would be your bit traditional form of assessment. Of course, you can innovate on what sort of assessment you want to do, as long as it is aligned to your objectives, right? So again, as teachers, all of our actions inside the classroom should be traced back to our objectives. You don't do activities because you think it's fun. Not only is it fun, right? Of course, that's also one of our goals, but we want to make sure that it's also aligned to our goals. Or sometimes this is actually very common problem in elementary teachers. They would conduct an activity for the students so that they would have free time. So that's a very bad practice for teachers, right? Because the students themselves, they would also know, mom is just using this as a free time to do her other activities. Of course, right, as teachers, we have very busy schedules, but at the same time, we don't want to use the class itself as an excuse to do our other activities. Okay, so that's in terms of giving evaluation. By the way, you have your assessment one already, right? Just to be sure, because I'm not familiar with the prospectus of BEd students. You have your assessment one already, or last semester? Have you taken it already? Last assessment one. So this is where you're going to make exams, make test papers, make quizzes. have you already had your assessment subject or course?
Assessment in Learning 1 and 2 po, sir.
Okay, good, good, right. So this is where your learnings in assessment 1 and 2 would take effect, right? So in evaluate. So that means you'll have to have the correct case validity, content validity, and of course, reliability is more on the data afterwards, right? Okay, so that's the 5 E's. However, 5 E's is actually quite, let's say, outdated. When we say outdated, we now have a new method. So the 7 E's method is an extension of the 5 E's. They are actually quite well, the same actually. We just added 2 more steps, elicit and extend. So as the name implies, this is actually, well, of course, right? So if number 1, you're going to engage your students, you're going to ask question, then number 2 is where they're going to answer, or rather you can make another activity or make another motivational question and then get their answers. And then extend is, of course, a follow-up to your elaborate. So you can have the students give out their answers and then explain their answers. So in 7 is essentially engage and elaborate has been split into 2 more steps. So I guess as a guide for teachers on what should we do here specifically, right? Because that's one of the problems in, I would say, doing the methods, right? Because when it comes to the methods themselves, some of them are not entirely explicit. They would give you a general idea of what should you do in this step, but not the exact steps, right? Okay. So you can actually use this one for your lesson plan instead of 5 E's. So we have engage, elicit, explore, explain, elaborate, extend, and evaluate. Okay, so that's the method that you would be using for your lesson plan. So for science, we'll be using strictly the 7 E's method or the 5 E's method. Although, yeah, let's go with 7 E's instead because that's the newer method. So at least when you graduate, you'll be using 7 E's instead of 5 E's instead. Actually, even the book that I'm using is quite, I would say, even though this was published 2019, they're still using 5 E's method. So I'm not sure why they have decided to use 5 E's despite 7 E's already existing. So yeah, that's again one of my concerns when it comes to using Filipino books. We are often far behind when it comes to the advancement in not just science but also in the field of teaching. Okay, so going back to our K-12 curriculum guide. So these are grade level standards for grade 3 science. Essentially, the topic that they would be using. Okay, so let me just copy this one. Okay, let's use, sorry, let me just paste this one. Okay, okay, let me end the presentation here. Okay, so we'll be adding more slides. So before we go into some of the activities, I actually have some activities beforehand, but these are elementary level. So we'll try answering them if, yeah, we should still have time, right? So our class ends at 11:30. So let me just put some images here. Although this is already part of the, oops, sorry, is it moving? So this is already part of the K-12 Science Curriculum Guide, right? Okay, let's place this here. So for the entirety of Science Grade 3, so let's place this here. Image. Oops. Why is it lagging? It's loading. Okay. Okay. So that we would know what would we be tackling in science. Okay, let's add another one here. Yeah, it's actually quite long. Although if you already have the K-12 Science Curriculum Guide, right, this is just a review of that. Although when you're teaching in private school, of course they would have their own curriculum guide, so to speak. But of course, those curriculum guide is also based on DepEd's curriculum guide, right? Because you want the students to have the minimal knowledge, um, prescribed by the government. So in private school, usually we do give out more topics compared to public schools, right? But for public schools, it's only up to this level, right? But for um, private school, right, they would have more topics. Although some private public schools themselves are much more advanced. Like for example, if you have heard of PSI, right, Philippine Science High School, despite being a public school, they have a much deeper discussion when it comes to of course the science, right? Okay, so almost here for grade 3. Okay, it's quite long actually. Okay, how many more pages do we have here? Okay, almost done. Okay, I should 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, sorry, 4 more pages, so please bear with me in adding this one. Then after this, okay, we'll proceed with some activities, right? I'll be requiring participation from the class later, so in answering some of the activities that I'll be giving out. Okay, what's next? Space. What's this? This is the okay. 3. Oops, sorry, not this one. Hopefully, Menti does not have a limit on the number of slides. Because usually, when it comes to these kinds of, let's say, free software, they would have certain limits. For example, like I have said previously, Google Jamboard has a limit on 20 slides. For Menti, I have not yet reached the limit. Maybe for this one, we might reach the limit. Okay, and then, okay, last slide. Okay, and then, so we'll be talking about what are discussed in grade 3 science. And then next meeting, we'll be talking about grade 4 science. So in here, we'll be talking about per grade level. Okay, that's the last one for the topics for grade 3. Okay, so let's go here. Did it go full screen? Okay. Is it legible for those using mobile phones? Are you able to read the topic or the image?
Yes po, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, so for the first topic,
Okay.
okay, that's good. Okay, so for the first topic in grade 3 physics, right, so we have force and motion. So what's our content standards here? So the learners demonstrate understanding of motion of the objects. So of course in here we can have several activities. For example, you can let them play with toy cars. Right? So how is the car moving? What about remote controlled cars? Right? So you can have a lot more elaborate ways. Or even you can let them pinpoint an animal or an insect. How are they moving? Are they moving upwards in this vertically, vertically in the sky, horizontally? And in the performance standards, the learner should be able to observe, describe, and investigate the position and movement of things around them. But I would say instead of things, well, they should also include living things, right? Not just non-living things. And then for learner competency, the learner should be able to, so number 1, describe the position of a person or an object in relation to a reference point such as a chair, door, or another person. Okay, so in here, we have here, I would say, a difficult term for elementary students. So reference point. So how can we simplify the term reference point? So we can say the reference point is the point of view or how the person is viewing or looking at another object. So that would be the reference point. So if you're the person at the door, right, and you're looking at another person far away from you in the room, how far are you? Or it could be the other way around. How is that person far away from the person at the door? Is it how many feet or how many inches? Well, it should be feet, right? Because it's a bit longer. In terms of the measurement, usually we use feet, right? 12 inches is equals to 1 foot. Although for elementary, I don't think they use meters yet, right? 1 meter, 2 meters, because 1 meter is equals to 3.1 feet. So 3.1 feet is, actually that's quite long, right? That would be taller than most elementary students. So not taller, sorry. It's a head taller than, is it? No. How small are elementary students? 3 feet, right? Or 2 feet even? 3.5, right? So around those size, right? So they might not be able to imagine that yet. Or maybe you can use that as an example for classes or students that are much more, let's say, advanced in their study, or they are much smarter. And then, what's the second learning competency? Identify things that can make objects move, such as people, water, objects move such as people, water, wind, and magnets. Okay, so these are essentially your objects that can produce force. Now for DepEd, they have here this code, right? Learning materials. For the learning materials, I would assume this is given out for the public school teachers. Although then again, I think this was actually used as a reference for this topic itself, because for public school students or public schools, they have their own set of books, right? Well, as with any sort of schools, right? They have their own books. And as for the science equipment, so a pair of bar magnets, a plastic ruler, 12 inches or 30 centimeters. Or you have your pair of bar magnets, a toy car, well, of course, they should be friction, right? It could be battery operated or non-battery operated. So as we can see here, the equipment used in elementary it's not primitive per se, but these are objects that can be readily found within their house. Probably except for the toy car, right? Because not everyone has a toy car. Although for the pair of bar magnets, we can get that from the laboratory, but these are simple apparatus, right? Or simple lab supplies. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. Okay, so learning competency number 3. So describe the movement of objects such as fast, slow, forward, backward, stretching, or compressing. Alright, so they can use, again, a toy car or even a slinky, right? This spring, right? Especially for stretching and compression. So for fast, slow, or moving forward or backward, of course, you have your car. So for the elaborate step of our 5Es, as we have said before, they could pinpoint animals as well, right? What if you have an aquarium in the class, right? You have your fishbowl, or in the bio lab, right? You want to let the student go out of the class, tour them around the school. Okay, what are some animals or cars that you can see that are moving fast or moving slow? What about moving forward and or backwards, right? You let them pinpoint and give out answers, so that in the explain step, you can now give out the proper definition of what is fast, what is slow, what do you mean by stretching, what do you mean by compressing, so all those kinds of things. And then for elaborate, right, you can let the students give out their example and then describe, is it moving fast or slow? Or if you can even put another question, when do they move fast, when do they move slow? Like for example, for animals, right, they move fast if they want to catch their food. They move slow if they are resting, or they are going to one place to another, right? So you can let them elaborate further on their answers. Okay, permission. Okay, sure. Okay, so Mr. Claver, right, Marvin? Okay, sure. And then, so next slide, we have, okay, so energy, lights, and sound. So content standards, sources and uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity. in here, I would say let the students be careful, right, when it comes to electricity, especially in the explore part, right? They might touch some electrical equipment and they might get grounded, right? So those are some things that we have to consider when it comes to dealing with elementary students. Okay, so performance standards. Apply the knowledge of the source and use of light, sound, heat, and electricity. So where can we find light? Of course, you have the sun, the stars, the moon, the cell phones, the lights on the house. What about for sound? So same thing. It could be from animals, person, appliances. What about for heat? So when you're cooking, again, the sun again. What else? From the fire. For electricity, we have, of course, the different appliances. And then describe source of light and sound, heat, and electricity. So you can let them explain here, especially in the elaborate part. How do you think these objects produce light and sound? Although that question could be reserved for let's say higher levels, or we can go with something easier. So for example, for a flashlight, how does a flashlight produce light? Right, by switching on the flashlight. So what is you can add another question. How is the flashlight powered? By using the batteries. And then you can ask another question. Okay, what if we put out the battery and then you switch on the flashlight? Would there still be light? Okay, of course there's none, right? So again, you can give out another question again. So does that mean the light comes from the flashlight or the battery? So you can let the students think of their answer, right? Because the flashlight is just a tool, and the main source of the light is, I would say, technically from the batteries, right? Your flashlight would just be a tool to transform the electrical energy from the electrical charge from the battery into a light, right? So that's why when it comes to explain part, right? So in the elaborate part, in the explore part, they are picking out sources. So in the explain part, you want to correct some misconceptions by asking them questions, right? Just like what we have used before when it comes to the battery and the flashlight. So where does the light actually comes from? So you can tell them, okay, so the flashlight is the tool to convert the electrical energy from the battery to transform it into light. Same thing with sound. So for humans, right, we have our voice box. Or for animals, or for insects rather, they have different body parts. So why do they produce sounds? Okay, so you can have them answer several kinds of answer. So that's why in the explain part, I would want the teachers yourselves to ask more questions, right? Not just discussing them as if you were giving a lecture. So for the science equipment, connecting wires and bulb socket assembly, usually for number 1, they should already be readied, right? Essentially, this is a what? A circuit board. Right. You don't have your electricity and magnetism class. So in our electricity and magnetism class, we can create a simple series circuit where we already have a what's the proper term? Let's say the box for the battery. So once you input the box, it would then you have your switch which could lit up the lamp or the light bulb. So yeah, the dry cell holder, flashlight, incandescent bulb. Although we don't really use incandescent bulb anymore. This is outdated. So what's the difference between incandescent bulb and LED light. So for LED flashlight, they're actually not cheaper. When it comes to the battery, they are much more less extensive when it comes to the usage of power. But for incandescent lamps or bulbs, they actually produce heat itself. And I'm not sure if we still have flashlight with incandescent bulbs, because these are quite dangerous. Maybe there is a mistake in this one. Instead of flashlight, it should be lamp. The lamp with incandescent bulb. Okay, next slide. Okay, so enumerate uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity. So for number 5, this is an easier learning competency, right? Because they're just listing out. So in your Bloom's taxonomy, right, listing out is just part of what? Not knowledge. Remembering, right? Remembering. Yeah, that's just remembering. Listing out the sources. So it's not actually quite difficult. What about for Earth and Space Science? So first topic would be the surrounding. So learners demonstrate understanding of people, animal, plants, lakes, rivers, streams, hills, mountains, and other landforms and their importance. So the learner should be able to express their concerns about their surroundings through teacher-guided and self-directed activities. So number 1, describe the things found in the surroundings. Okay, so that's the entire thing. So for Earth and Space Science, this is actually still Earth Science, right? Not yet in the space part. So you can let the students again, for elementary, usually I would imagine it would be better for them to go out of the classroom, right, pick up some dirt, and then, okay, how is this dirt different from the dirt near the beaches, right? Or what about, how is it different from cement? Or when it comes to different animals, so how is the bird different from a bat? Or how is this species of bird different from another species of bird? Although we don't use the term species for elementary because that's a difficult term for them. You can say, what's the difference of this, let's say, brown bird to this other white-colored bird, right? So aside from the color, what about the size of the beak, the size of the bird itself, or the wingspan, or the size of the wing? As for misconceptions, for animals, I would say it would be very few, but for piece of land like dirt, it might be dependent on the student themselves, right? Because for geology, right, we have the basic different types of rocks, right, and then different types of soil. You don't want to give them technical answers, right? For example, igneous rock, sedentary rock, and then metamorphic rock, right? Those are technical terms for elementary students that they might not be able to understand yet. Okay, the number 2, relate the importance of surroundings to people and other living things. So this one should be easy for them, especially if they're not located within the city, right? Because within the city, it's a literal urban jungle. So there's not much nature, so to speak. But if, let's say, in Pili, right, We can see hills, we can see farms, you can see so many trees. But for schools in the city, usually okay, the tree is here because it's part of the decoration. But for trees in, let's say, less urban areas, it's much more organic when it comes to its function, right? So the trees can provide shade, it could provide food for the other animals, right? Provide air. So those kinds of normal things that we often think about the use of trees, right? So that's what you can see here. When it comes to the science equipment in Earth and space, there's actually none, right? Or I would say very few in other modules. That's because you can easily use the environment itself as an example, right? Or as a sample, as a realia. Okay, and now what about for the weather? Now for the weather, this is where you have to be careful, right? Why is that? Because in most books, they would list out all of the types of weather. But here in the Philippines, of course, right, our weather and climate are limited, so to speak, because we're in the equator. So we cannot really experience snow or what else? Hailstorm, or even what? Well, we do experience mist, right, or fog. But for hailstorm and snow, we don't really experience them, right? For hailstorm, it's a very rare occurrence, but for snow itself, it hasn't happened yet, right? Because we're at the equator. So, what are the content standards? Types and effects of weather as they relate to daily activities, health and safety, performance standard, express ideas about safety measures during different weather conditions creatively. So, through artwork, poem, and song. So again, these are just examples, right? Artwork, poem, and song, because not every student are, let's say, creatively gifted. Some of them might be what's the proper term? Shy when it comes to drawing, right? So what can we do instead? So we can have them put up a collage instead. Can elementary students do it? No, they probably cannot do collage yet, right? Because they would have to use scissor. When it comes to using scissor, for elementary students, they might get hurt, right? Improper usage of scissor. But of course, if it's grade 4, 5, and 6, that's fine. But for grades 1, 2, and 3, you have to check what sort of scissor they are using. It should be the small scissors with a large grip, right? Because their fine motor skills are not yet very developed. And the scissors should be the ones that have thick, or this one thick, thick heads, or thick scissors, right? So they cannot use it for stabbing, right? Of course, we want to not have any sort of accidents inside the classroom. Okay, learning competency. Describe the changes in the weather over a period of time. So of course, here in the Philippines, we only have 2 seasons. We have the rainy season and the hot season. As for our climate, okay, so this is already on the level of high school actually. So you want them to know the difference between climate, weather, and season. Right, for climate, that's the general temperature in a specific area. For season, that's length, has a specific length. And of course for weather, that changes essentially daily or even hourly, right? And then number 4, so communicate how different types of weather affects activities in the community. So this is already where you can insert the Pag-asa bulletin board, right? What are the levels of signals, right? The storm signals. And then content 3, 3.1, natural objects in the sky. So this is where we can see the sun, the star, the moon, usually those things, right? So natural objects in the sky affects one daily activities. So list down activities which affect their daily activities. So for example, for the moon, right? For elementary, they might not yet be aware of the high tide and then the low tide, but probably they can answer on a simple level. If the sun is out, right, or if it's evening, that means there's no classes, right, or there's no work anymore. Or they could say when it's noontime, okay, that's time for lunch, right? Or when the sun is out, that means it's morning, it's time to wake up. Or they could even say in the afternoon, right? They could describe the sunset, right? So when it's the sunset, they might have an idea. Okay, classes are almost over, right? Because for elementary, classes often ends at what? 3 p.m., 4 p.m. sometimes, right? Depending on the school. And then learning competency number 6, describe the natural objects that are found in the sky during daytime and nighttime. So aside from the sun and the moon, right, you could say the different stars. You can even put here, okay, the constellations, the zodiac signs. So they can have them a little bit of sightseeing during the evening. Although again, precaution for students, like if you want to give them an example or an assignment rather, okay, take a picture of a constellation, right? You have to give them a warning or a caution that they should be supervised by an adult, right, or by their parents. And then another one, okay, number 7, to communicate how the natural objects in the sky affect daily activities. So when I say communicate, that's the student elaborating more on how they're going to answer, right? If the performance standard is more on listing down, right? So in the learning competency number 7, you would want them to elaborate more on their answers. Maybe some of them even have parents working late at night, right? So we can have a set of comparison where some parents are working late at night, but some are already home by 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, right? So yeah, point of comparison between students. Although be careful when it comes to those kinds of discussion, when it comes to family matters, because you might accidentally dig up some, let's say, unfortunate stories, right? So just be careful with kids, right? Because they are much less, what's the proper term? They don't have the social acumen when it comes to these kind of things, right? They are very honest in their answers, right? So they might say their parents are often late. They often come late at home, so they would often eat dinner along with their siblings without their parents, or something like that, right? You might hear some sad stories, right? So we tend to stray away from those kind of answers, or at the very least try to distract the students, right, by giving out another answer or giving out another question, right? So again, be careful when it comes to dealing with kids. I think even way back then, um, if you recall your high school class, were you taught about the Punnett square? So anyone remembers the Punnett square? So Punnet square. So the Punnett square would tell you the probable outcome of certain phenotypes or certain genetics. So if your parents have this sort of physical trait, right, and then you can check what are the possibilities of this trait being passed on to the child. So for example, tall parents, and then of course we also have the this one, the dominant trait and then the less dominant trait or the recessive trait. So it's possible that two tall parents could come up with a short kid, right? Or what about for other traits? So that's not hair color. Hair color is usually black, right? So that's a good example. Hair color or face structure, so those kind of things. Okay, and for the last topic for Earth and Space Science, we have so last learning competency. So enumerate safety measures to avoid the harmful effects of sun's heat and light. Okay, so you can let them say use this one, lotion, right? The one with the SPF, right? Sunblock, right? Yeah, that's the term. Or drink a lot of water, or bring umbrellas to avoid the heat of the sun. So as you can see here, the topics for grade 3 are quite simplified, right? But again, just be careful in using terms that are too technical. But then again, the book that will be given out the book that will be giving out or given to you rather by your school administration are already designed or catered to your students. So as a hint in writing your lesson plan, if you have any siblings or cousins who are still in elementary, maybe you could try borrowing their books and try reading the topics listed there for science. Okay, so that's our topics in science, right? So it's quite really simplified, right? And most of them are usually listing out and then elaborating on why do they think, why do you think that's their answer? Right? So let the students elaborate. So why do you think the sun affects the daily activities of humans, right? Because we have to go to sleep, or if we're tired, right, we have to go to sleep, or if they stay too long out in the sun, they might get heat stroke. Okay, so that's the different content standards for grade 3. Now for the activities, okay, let me just get some files here. Where is it? Okay, here I should have some worksheets here. Okay, physics. Wait, is it this one? No, not this one, sorry. No, not this one. Okay, so yeah, let me just use this one instead. Let me minimize this. And then snapshot. Okay, so we'll have our first interaction. Just edit this one here, new slide, and then multiple choice, image. Okay. Okay, save. How many? Okay, still loading. We can edit. Let's edit this one. I don't think you can see it. Perfect. Square. No, freeform. Okay, let me just adjust the image because it's not visible. Bars, donuts, dots, pie. Let's use dots. And then customize. Let's use no, not this one. Okay, okay, yeah, this should be a better setting. Choose the answer that best matches the definition. Okay, so for letter A, option 1, so A, wait, no, is it? Wait, so there should not be multiple choice. Let's say butter, word cloud, select answer. No, sorry, not multiple choice because this is matching type. So for matching type, we should use another option here. No, not this one. Sorry, another content pala. No, not skills. Ranking, Q&A. Select answer, type answer. 2x2 grid, who will win? Okay. Okay, sige. Let's try pinning an image instead. Okay, this does not translate properly, right? Best matching definition because this is matching type. Okay. Sorry. Let's try editing this, not pin the image. Let's try select answer instead. Okay, should be select answer. Unavailable. Okay, so letter A is light, B is sound, C is kinetic, D is thermal, is engineer, maximum number of options. Okay, that's bad. Okay, let's try changing this instead. Ano na lang tuloy. Type answer. I think correct answer to display. No. Okay, open-ended na lang tuloy. Or word cloud. Sige, para open-ended yung answer. Entries per participant, isa lang. Sige. Okay, so for number 1, ability to work. Okay, let's try this tuloy. Wait, mali. Sorry, let the participants submit multiple times. Okay, let's try this one, right? Okay, present. Okay, so for number 1, hopefully you can see the image properly, right? So choose the answer that best matches the definition. So for number 1, what's the ability to do work? Is it A, light, B, sound, C, kinetic, D, thermal, E, engineer, F, chemical, G, potential, H, energy, I, biomass, J, mechanical, or K, nuclear? So what do you think, class? Sige. Type niyo yung answer
H
niyo.
po.
In your phones. I think meron diyang parang option sa ano niyo, di ba? So parang lumabas yung answer niyo dito. Sige, try nga natin. So type niyo yung answer niyo sa ano. Kasi real time naman yung sa Menti, right? Na-click niyo yung yung link. So eto. Dito yung wait, copy natin yung link. So click niyo yung link sa Google Meet, yung chat sa Google Meet. So click niyo yung menti.com. Okay yan. So lumabas na H. Okay, so isa pala yung nag-answer. Sige, who else? Sige, try natin kung ilan yung tama. Well, of course, easy naman yung answer dito. Sige, so let's try. At least, siguro mga... Okay. Sige lang. Fill up nyo lang Okay. Next one. Okay, so H, energy. Pwede ko ba makuha yung dito? Yung parang data. Okay, so ganito yung paggamit ng Menti, diba? So, at ang maganda sa Menti, so that pala English kasi baka meron tayong international na. Okay, so in using Menti, this is one way to get the real-time interaction from your participants without, I would say, unlike in Google Meet or in chat, right? It's very unorganized. Although for Menti, the answers are anonymous, so we can say who answered who for now. And okay, so someone answered the entire thing. Okay, so that's good, right? So for number 1, okay, yeah, that's H, right? Energy. So for number 2, so energy is stored on the chemical bonds of molecules which is released during chemical reaction. So what's that? So of course that's F. F or nuclear. Okay. Can we enable questions from the audience? Enable comments. Start countdown. Can I see the answers here? Okay, I can reset results. Close voting. Okay, let's try resetting the answers here. Okay, for this slide. Okay, so for number 2, so energy stored on the chemical bonds of molecules which is released during a chemical reaction. So what letter is that? So yung H, di ba, nagamit natin yon. So is it A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I, J, or what's the other one? Nuclear. So what's our answer? Is it nuclear? Okay. Any other answers? So is it mechanical? So energy stored on the chemical bonds of molecules, which is released during a chemical reaction. So any other answers from the class? So ano kaya so what should be our answer here? So K, nuclear. Okay, any other so we only have 3 students who are participating. What about the rest? So we have how many students in the 14. So I'm expecting more participants or participation. So what's our number 2? So energy is stored on the chemical bonds of molecules, which is released during a chemical reaction. Okay, so this one should actually be very this one. It's not actually what's K, nuclear, right? It's not nuclear actually, and it's not mechanical. So it should be chemical energy, right? Because this is released during a chemical reaction. Okay, let's try answering this a bit faster. Okay, so for number 2, that should be chemical, right? Because it's during the bonding itself. For number 3, blank energy examples include computer screens, lamps, and the sun. So that should be light energy for number 3. For number 4, energy is the sum of an object's kinetic energy and potential energy. That should be not mechanical. Sorry, wait. Yeah. This is the thing with kinetic and mechanical. Technically, this should be mechanical because kinetic is a specific term. So for number 3, that's number 3 light. Number 4, that's mechanical. Number 5, roller coaster at the top of a hill. That's a high blank energy. So at the top of a hill, that should be high potential, right, at the top of the hill. And then for 6, bottom of the hill, it should have high kinetic energy. And the number 7, black energy is the energy produced when the molecules of an object vibrate. That should be thermal energy for number 7. For number 8, blank energy is released when the nucleus of an atom is split. So number 8, this is our nuclear energy. Number 9, radios, vocal cords, and guitars all produce blank energy. So of course that's sound energy. Number 10, a person who designs safe energy system. That's should be the engineer at letter E. Number 11, for example, logs burning in a fireplace. So this should be biomass. That's our remaining letter. So as we can see here, when it comes to giving out assessment for the students, again, the purpose could be formative for our assessment for the students here. So this is essentially after the the lesson. Right? Or we could have something like this. Okay, let's try. Okay, let me try giving out another example of an activity for elementary students. Where did I place it? Okay, we can have this one here. Okay, this one is quite long. Okay, let me try copy pasting this. Okay, another example could be this one. There's no right answer. Okay. Okay, let me put an image here instead. So it could be this one. Okay, hopefully you can read the image. Okay, it's a bit large. Okay, vocabulary review. So you want to let them play on what do we call this again? Word search, right? Okay, you want to let the students word search. Okay, where can we find energy? Okay, is it diagonal, horizontal, or horizontal reverse, vertical, or vertical reverse? Okay, different direction. Now, since this is a review, we often place this in engage, right? We cannot use this as an assessment, right? Because the use of the term review means that we have used it, or rather we have discussed it yesterday or for the past or the last meeting. Alright, so for your engaged part, it could be something not cognitive. Yeah, it could be something cognitive, or it could be something a bit traditional like this one. Right? They could do a vocabulary review or doing a word search, and then using the answers that they have picked in the word search, they would have to use that to answer the fill out the blanks on the second part of the vocabulary review. So energy in motion is called, so that's kinetic energy. Stored energy is called, so that's potential. So all those kind of, I would say, simpler discussion. Right. So again, we have a lot of freedom when it comes to elementary students, but our important, let's say, reminder here is that they should always be doing something with their hands, right? At the very least, it's something that they would write, and not just something that they would have to answer verbally. So at the bare minimum, you want to let them, okay, answer a piece of, let's say, answer a piece of, not file. Sorry, that's the wrong term. Answer a piece of paper with the tests, or with the test on it already, right? Or if it's a verbal, it should be something that is something that is, what's the proper, sorry, I'm using the right term, not inquisitive. Something that is, let's say, not just challenging, but something that is invigorating, or something that, what's the term that we use, tickle their minds, right? Something that would tickle their curiosity, so to speak. Okay, other examples we can have are, okay, this, or not this one. Okay, this one here, a crossword puzzle. So we can even have a crossword puzzle. Okay, let me just show it again. Okay, let's have a new slide. Oh, wait, no, not this one. Image. Okay, now what about the design? Okay, so this is another aspect that I would say is rarely tackled on during making activities. Or presumably, this should have been discussed in, it could either be discussed in methods, assessment, or even in, um, do you have a subject called EdTech, Educational Technology, or Art Education? Do you have a subject similar to those names? So art ed, in art education, that's where we develop our creative skills, right? We draw paintings, we cut papers, we perform origamis, so different kinds of artist stuff, as the name implies. And for edtech, that is how we integrate technology in our pedagogy. So they have those kinds of topics in your prospectus, edtech, and art education. Do you have something similar to those in your subjects or prospectus? Or probably none. Okay, so when it comes to designing the papers for your elementary students, make sure the font size are large, right? Because we're dealing with students whose physical, let's say, physical faculties are not yet properly developed. So if you're going to let them write something, make sure the space that they're writing on is large, right? Because usually when students are writing, elementary students are writing, their letters are quite big, right? They're quite large. Hence, we can see, let's say for example, this one, crisscross, right? The space that they would have to write on their answers are quite large. This is actually, I think it's long size bond paper or short size bond paper. And there's no zoom in here. Can you zoom in? Okay, no zoom in here. Minimize, countdown. Okay, there's no zoom in, but probably on your phones, right? It should be larger than on this screen. So in here, make sure the spaces that you're providing for your students are large enough for them to have space to write on. So how many boxes, or not boxes, how many answers do we have here? We have 1, 2, 3, we got 8, right? So 4 times 2, we get 8 words for them to fill out. So for these kind of things, right, again, we have to consider the spacing. Could even add some form of design, but as they grow, not grow, but as they move up in terms of grade level, you can try having a more, let's say, standardized font size, like with like with high school students. But for grade 3 and 4, you have to be mindful of the face validity of your exams. So not just exams, but simple activities. Although the things missing here is that, okay, where did they write their names, their sections, but usually these kinds of things are part of a module or part of the book. Right? Okay. where else do I have here other activities? Okay, so for earth science naman, so types of clouds. Okay, this should be vertical. Let me just rotate the image. Can I rotate this one? Okay, yeah, I can rotate it. Rotate that. Oops, wait, no, not. Okay, this one. Okay, so for another example, for your earth science class, we can have this sort of activity. Okay, let's close this one. Okay. Image. Okay. So for this activity, just okay. So you're almost out of data. Okay, that's fine. Okay, hopefully we can have actually more face-to-face classes, right? Because for these kinds of discussion, lectures are fine, right? But usually when I'm discussing science too or teaching science, I would have to let you answer this kind of papers, right? Okay, so what about for this example? So in here, they would have to write what sort of clouds are this. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 types of. Is it 9? Let me check my. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, sorry, there's 10. So there's 10 types of clouds, and they would have to answer. It could be on the clouds itself or just near the clouds. Right, so again, spacing is important for these kinds of exercises or kinds of activities for your students. So here, what should be our answer? Okay, let me paste this. Oops. Okay. So for this one, our answers here should be. It didn't close. What happened? Okay. Let's have a new slide. Menti is lagging. Oh no. Okay. What happened? Menti is freezing. Okay, slide 25. Okay, so this should be the answers to our types of clouds. So we have here our. Okay, still loading. We have our cirrostratus, cirrus clouds, cirroculumbus, cirrocumulus, cumulonimbus, altostratus, altocumulus, nimbus stratus, cumulus, stratocumulus, stratus, and that's it. Right? So 10 types of clouds. Okay, So for this one, types of planets. Oh, sorry, the planet. This is for grade 5 already. Alright, so we're not yet dealing with this one. Okay, not this one. Layers of the Earth. Okay, not yet. Okay, so these are some example worksheets that you could use for elementary students. And of course, right, some of these are actually for this should be for grade 5 actually. Right, because the types of clouds are on those kinds of level. Or you can even let them draw, okay, what do you think, or how do you think clouds look like when they're going to rain, right? You let them color, you let them, but of course when it comes to color, it would just be color gray, right? So not much of difficulty again when it comes to coming up with this sort of activity. So, but the challenge here would be, I would say, answering their questions, right? And usually when it comes to, again, like I have said before, when it comes to answering their questions, you have to be careful of your answers, not to give them too technical of an answer, otherwise they might not get it. And sometimes kids or students would say, ano, usually this is for preschools pala, hindi na elementary. But for elementary at least, they do have the, I would say, what's the proper term? No, not conscience. That's the wrong term. I'm running out of words to use for, what's the English term for that one? Right, yeah, they should be aware. That's the proper term. They should be aware that their questions have a definite answer. Right? Unlike younger kids, sometimes they would say why, without even acknowledging the answer. Right? That's the difference when it comes to younger kids, like preschool, compared to elementary. They're able to process answers better compared to preschool students. Okay, so that's grade 3 content for science. So again, in terms of difficulty, I don't think we have to have an actual lecture for this one. Right, so again, recalling back our topics here. Okay, so force and motion. Force and motion is this one. Right, I think we all know how we can describe motion, right? There's no need for this, unless of course you can say, sir, some additional info or probably some clarification, right? Some misconceptions. Then what else? So sources of light, sound, and heat and electricity. I think we're also all familiar here, right? No need for separate discussion. Enumerate uses of light, sound, heat, and electricity. Okay, yeah. Describe the things found in the surroundings. Okay, again, another easy topic. We'll try to reserve a separate lecture if the topics, I would say, are, or rather in your case, are forgotten already. But so far, all topics are still clear, right? You should all know these things, right? So things found in the surroundings, right? So you have your people, animal, plants, lakes, rivers, streams. But when we go to grade 5 and grade 6, probably we can have a separate lecture. But for now, again, right? So quite easy. No need for a separate lecture unless there's some need for some clarification. So any questions regarding the topic itself first, like topic in grade 3, um, for physics, for earth science. So any clarification? Right, wala naman, diba? So again, these are all just still very easy. We don't really need to answer this one yet. But again, what we want to focus in is the actual designing of the lesson. Okay, wait, no, not this one. Go back to the slides. Okay, this. Okay, so again, we have our 7 E's in writing the lesson plan. So we have our engage, listen, explore, explain, elaborate, extend, and evaluate. But aside from the 7 E's, when it comes to writing the objectives, make sure that you're writing them of the 3 domains: the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor. Although for public schools, usually they just write the cognitive domains. However, when you have been employed in a private school, it would be good if you know how to write objectives for affective and psychomotor domains as well. Right? Especially for affective domain, if you have been employed by let's say, not a Catholic school, let's say a Christian school, so to speak. Because usually in those kinds of schools, Catholic schools or religious schools, part of their objective is to have values integration. So how can you integrate the values in your lesson? And usually value integration is one of the more difficult part in designing science lessons. And even I myself had difficulty in writing affective objectives in science, right? Because science topics are usually as is, right? They're quite what's the proper term? They're quite explicit. But usually we can integrate values by citing, like for example, in weather, right? Pag-asa, safety procedures, usually those kinds of things. Right? That's how we can integrate values for science. But for psychomotor, it's actually much easier, right? Let's say you can have the students pick up some samples, or not pick up some samples, pick up some objects inside the classroom, right? Or even games as part of your object. So rather, in the games, what would they develop? Right? So the psychomotor that they have developed in the games would be your objectives. Like for example, what could be a simple psychomotor objectives? So demonstrate how cars moves using a remote controlled car, right? Or even better, if they have, usually this is for private schools with the proper budget, right? Assemble a simple, let's say, not a pendulum. Pendulum is advanced. Them assemble a simple toy car, right? For example, in some robotics class, like in science high school, they do have robotics classes there. Right? So it's easier for them to make a psychomotor objectives, right? Okay. So for any questions, and I already have received text from Ma'am Eileen. Okay. Regarding the price pala, 90 snacks, 140 lunch. Okay. So later on we'll go to the proposal again, right? Okay. So for any questions, meron ba or wala? What about on the 3 assessment? So your assessment number 1 would be lesson plan making. So I'll be posting it in the VLP on the instructions and in the rubrics, right? But it should be printed. I'm trying to reduce the strain of the VLP because we're almost max capacity, max capacity in the VLP. So I won't be requiring my students to submit soft copies. Instead, you'll have to print the lesson plan along with the rubric, so I can easily grade them and then give you back when I'm done grading them. And of course, for assessment 1 and 2, 2 and 3, so your lesson plan, your demo with lesson plans. Okay, so for any questions, yes, Miss Mora, questions?
Sir, about the format po ng lesson plan.
For the format,
and then yung topic po.
for the topic, of course, it's also science, right? It's up to you on what topic, as long as it's grades 3 to 6 science. Right? It could be physics or earth and space science, not chemistry and biology. So 2 fields, so physics or earth and space science. That is for grades 3 to 6. Okay, since we are dealing with teaching science in the primary grade 4 physics and earth and space science. For the format, I'm still deliberating whether it would be fully detailed or is it the one by DepEd. Because again, like what we have said before, because I think the assumption of DepEd is that the teachers who have graduated are already proficient in asking questions. So most likely the lesson plan might be fully detailed. Again, so that's our option A, right? That's our first scenario, that we're going to have a fully detailed lesson plan. And of course, I will also be uploading a sample as well. So how would you write a lesson plan? Like the parts, especially the parts. Okay, what else? Any questions? Anything else? Now, as for the deadline, I'll be posting them. But for assessments 2 and 3, the dates are already, let's say, set. So it's October 29 for BEd 3B, and then December 10 for your assessment number 3. So please make those dates open and free for yourselves, since that is a class, let's say class assessment, right? So all 42 students would be coming in on a Saturday, so we'll be inviting teachers from 4 other schools. Okay, so I'll be stopping the recording here so we can talk about the proposal because the proposal is not yet finished, so that should not be part of the recording yet.